Hello, dear soul. Wherever you are in this wide, quietly turning world, I welcome you with open arms and a soft voice meant only for you. Before we drift gently into the folds of history, may I ask how you are doing tonight? Are you tucked into bed, perhaps with the blankets pulled just under your chin? Are you lying on your side, one ear pressed to the pillow, the other open to the dark, listening for something calm, something kind? Or are you resting in a quiet room, the hum of the world fading into background, with only your thoughts for company? Wherever you are, whether it is a city pulsing behind heavy curtains or a village lit by a single lamplight, I am glad you found a way here. You're safe now. You're with me. This is Mystroot, where we wander ever so gently into the forgotten pages of time, letting the rhythm of the past lull us into dreams. And if you find peace in these midnight stories, these soft unravelings of centuries gone by, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It means the world to me and helps more dreamers like you find this quiet corner of the internet. Tonight, we will settle in for a long, peaceful tale of survival and simplicity. Not the survival of kings, nor the battles of famous men, but something much quieter, much more human. Tonight, we sink into the cold earth and creaking timbers of the medieval countryside. A place of muddy boots, woolen cloaks, whispered prayers, and firelight. A place where the cold was not a metaphor, but a daily adversary. Where warmth was not just comfort, but a matter of life. This story is not grand, but it is real. It is the story of how medieval peasants, ordinary people like you and me, endured the brutal winters of centuries past, when the nights were long and dark and the wind seemed to breathe through the very bones of the walls. So let your body grow heavy and your breath grow soft as we step back into a world without electricity, without the rush of engines or the glow of screens. Imagine it, a late afternoon in a quiet English village, somewhere in the middle of the 13th century. The year is 1271. It is the depth of winter. The days are short, and the air smells of damp straw, wood smoke, and frozen mud. The sun sets before supper, casting a pale light over the frost-hardened fields and thatched-roof cottages. Chickens have already been herded back into their coops. The sheep are huddled near the hedgerows, their breath steaming in the frigid dusk. A thin layer of ice crackles over the surface of every bucket left outside, and the sky above is a dome of slate, heavy with the threat of snow. You walk slowly, your boots crunching over the brittle grass, and your breath curls in front of you like a silver ribbon. Around you, the village is quiet. Smoke rises lazily from chimneys, curling upward like the last tendrils of a fading dream. The cottages are low to the ground, built with wattle and daub, slender wooden frames stuffed with straw and coated in mud, hardened over time like the calloused hands of their builders. Their roofs are thick with thatch, brown by age, weighted with frost. No glass windows here, only open shutters, now closed tight against the wind, perhaps covered with oil parchment or thin horn to keep out the worst of the cold. You approach one such cottage now. A faint light flickers through the slats. You duck low, pushing open the crooked wooden door, and a wave of warmth greets your face. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of smoke and stewing cabbage, of wet wool drying near the fire, of earth and closeness and living. Your eyes adjust slowly to the dim interior. It is one room, just one, with a loft above, accessible by a ladder. The hearth dominates the center of the space, glowing red and orange, fed by gnarled logs and twisted kindling. Around are low stools, coarse blankets, a few clay pots. Herbs dangle from the rafters, bundles of thyme and sage, gathered in summer and left to dry in the smoky air. A large dog, some mix of breeds lost to time, sleeps curled in a tight spiral by the fire. Chickens cluck softly in a corner, kept indoors not only for protection, but for warmth. A mother hums quietly as she kneads dough on a wooden board. Her fingers are red from cold, the skin around her knuckles cracked. But her voice is soft, and her shoulders move with the rhythm of generations. A child lies on a pallet of straw, tucked under coarse wool, eyes heavy with sleep. Another child pokes at the fire with a stick, watched carefully by the father, who is carving a spoon from a piece of ash wood. You sit near the hearth, and your limbs begin to thaw. The fire crackles, the flames licking upward in slow waves. You can hear the wind against the walls, a low, breathy moan, and the creak of beams settling above. A bowl is handed to you, pottage, thick with barley and root vegetables. There is no meat today, but it is warm, and that is enough. The spoon feels rough in your hand-carved, worn smooth by time. You eat slowly, savoring the heat that spreads from your throat to your belly. The voices around you are quiet. A few words are exchanged in a dialect older than the English you know, thicker, rounder, with Norse ghosts in its vowels and Saxon weight in its consonants. The children whisper a rhyme about Jack Frost. The father mutters a prayer. Outside, the night has fallen fully. The blackness presses against the shutters, and frost begins to crawl across the roof like fingers. But in here, the fire holds strong. The embers are red gold, pulsing. The cottage is not warm by modern standards, but it is warm enough. You pull your cloak tighter, the coarse wool scratching your neck, and breathe in the layered air of the space. Sweat and smoke, herbs and wood, bodies and bread. A cat slinks across the floor and curls into the straw beside you. The mother begins to sing. It's not a song, you know, but the tune is low and lilting, a cradle of notes meant to rock tired souls to sleep. She sings of the sun returning, of the wheat that will grow in spring, of a world that turns even when hidden beneath ice. You lean back against the wall, and the hard chill of the daub presses through your tunic. The child beside you has already begun to snore, his mouth open slightly, his hands tucked between his knees. The father banks the fire, covering the embers in ash to preserve their heat through the long night. Outside, a barn owl calls once, sharp and eerie, and then silence returns. You think of your own bed, your own walls, your own time. So far from this place, and yet not so different. You too crave warmth. You too are soothed by rhythm, by glow, by soft sound and softer company. The past is not a foreign land, but a familiar one, buried under the snowdrifts of time. So rest now. You are here, in the heart of winter. You are safe beside the hearth, and the night, however long, will pass. That as the darkness settles fully over the village, swallowing the last hints of twilight beyond the tree-lean, the rhythm of the household slows into its nightly rituals, timeless in their repetition, gentle in their purpose, and quietly sacred to those who live by them. Not because they were born of luxury or invention, but because they were born of necessity, the slow, thoughtful kind born from generations who learned how to endure the long, breathless winters. The hearth, now lowered to a steady, pulsing glow beneath a thin layer of ash, radiates its remaining warmth into the space with the patience of something ancient, something that understands its task is to hold the night at bay. A mother finishes sweeping the floor with a broom made of bound twigs, its bristles worn to softness by years of daily use. The rushes underfoot are dry, mingled with herbs for scent, and every step gives a soft crackle like walking on woven memories. Nearby, a father arranges a row of wooden shoes by the wall, their soles still damp with melted frost, while muttering a prayer of thanks that none split in the cold. In this world, where no material is wasted and no comfort taken for granted, the evening is not hurried. Everything has its rhythm, He pauses to touch the latch on the door. One last check to make sure the bolt is secure, not against intruders, but against the wind, which snakes in every crevice and breathes against every edge. You notice now the draft weaving its way through the gaps in the timber frame, despite the bundles of straw stuffed into cracks and the old cloth nailed over the joints. But still, compared to the outside world, this cottage is a sanctuary. A small child turns in his bedding, tugging a corner of a wool blanket up over his shoulder, his breath making a tiny puff in the frigid air above him. The mother kneels by his side, fingers gently brushing across his forehead, humming low in her throat. A tune passed down not from sheet music, but from habit, from memory, from a mother who once sang it to her in just such a moment, with the same rough hands and tired voice. The father settles on the edge of the straw mattress opposite, reaching for a wooden bowl filled with dry beans, and begins sorting them by touch. A quiet task, meditative, a way of ending the day by doing something useful while listening to the murmurs around him. Overhead, in the dim loft, an older sibling tugs a sheepskin over their shoulders. The loft itself nothing more than planks held above the common room, trapping a bit more of the heat that rises through the rafters. You listen to the house breathing, the fire snapping, the timbers settling, the wind curling and uncurling like a distant voice. This is the hour when time seems to stretch, when the limits of space melt inward, and what matters becomes not the outside world, but the closeness of this circle, this moment, this warmth. If the weather is kind, the stillness holds. But if the wind picks up, as it often does in January, it moans against the thatch, testing the strength of the roof, slipping down the chimney in ghost-like drafts. And on some nights, snow falls so quietly you might imagine the world has been wrapped in wool itself, soundless, soft, and endless. They don't fear the snow. It insulates in its way, but they do respect it. Too much snow means collapsed roofs, frozen wells, lost livestock. And so every sound from the roof is heeded, a creak, a sag, a muffled thump. The father glances up, his ear trained by years of winters, then returns to his task. There is no panic here, only the calm of those who prepared in the ways they know how, by stockpiling dry wood, preserving food in root cellars, salting meat, drying herbs, knitting garments, and whispering old stories that remind them they've seen winters come and go before. You begin to see the layers in their life. Not only the layers of clothing and bedding, but the emotional layers, the invisible armor that comes from shared hardship and inherited wisdom. The mother folds a woolen shawl and places it by the hearth, ready for the next person to wake and reach for it. She adjusts a small iron trivet on which sits a clay pot filled with water. Keeping it near the fire ensures it won't freeze overnight. In the corner, hanging from a beam, are bunches of dried mushrooms and garlic, knotted tightly in string, casting faint shadows like ancient talismans. These are not decorations. They are lifelines. The children do not complain of boredom. They don't yet know that concept. Their games are simple. A carved spinning top, a piece of string twisted into patterns, a song with claps and steps, a doll made from scraps of cloth and straw. In the dimness, every object has purpose, and even play is part of survival. It keeps spirits from freezing when the world outside is locked in ice. Occasionally, a story is told. Tonight, perhaps the father speaks of the old man who once crossed the moors during a blizzard with only a lantern and a loaf of bread. Or of the woman who boiled stones in water so her hungry children might believe something good was coming. These stories are not myths. They are lessons dressed in memory. They are wrapped in the fabric of community, shared not for entertainment alone, but to pass on resilience, to give shape to struggle, to ensure the next generation knows what to do when the firewood runs low or the bread sours early. As he speaks, The mother pours a thin cup of ale for herself and her husband. The ale is weak by design, brewed at home with a careful eye, not for drunkenness, but because the water alone might carry illness. The children sip a thinner version, just enough to warm their bellies. The mug is passed hand to hand, each touch a small gesture of connection. They have no clocks to mark the time. Instead, the household moves by instinct, by the feel of the fire, the weight of their own eyelids, the ache in their joints. Sleep comes not by schedule, but by natural rhythm. And yet, few of them will sleep straight through the night. It is common in these centuries to sleep in two halves. First sleep, then waking, then second sleep. That waking is quiet, almost sacred, used for prayer, or stoking the fire, or whispering with a partner under the covers, or nursing a baby back to sleep. No one panics about waking in the middle of the night. It is expected. Even in the dark, life moves softly forward. You begin to notice how silence is not empty here. It is full of presence, of peace, of listening. The fire settles into a rhythm, the kind you can feel in your chest if you lie close enough. A spoon scrapes softly in a bowl, and the sound echoes gently. The air grows colder, but not sharply so. The kind of cold that suggests sleep is coming, that the body is winding down, the heart slowing, the thoughts quieting. You lie still and listen. Someone coughs once, low and wet. Someone shifts in their sleep. A floorboard sighs beneath weight. And outside, the trees continue their ancient conversation with the wind. You think of your own life now. The heaters, the lamps, the buzz of the refrigerator, the light from passing cars. None of it is here. Only breath and wood and skin and wool. And in this silence, you find something you didn't know you missed. Something deep, something old. The kind of peace that doesn't come from escape, but from returning to a place your bones somehow remember, even if your memory does not. So stay here, in this hush. Feel the weight of time pressed lightly around your shoulders like a woolen shawl. Listen to the past, not as a scholar, but as a sleeper. It has more to tell you than you know. And now, as the cold deepens outside the fragile timber walls, the villagers settle further into the quiet rhythms of their winter night, guided by instincts honed over lifetimes and shaped by a world that offers no mercy to those who do not prepare. The hearth glows lower now, but its coals are still alive, still breathing their subtle heat into the thick shadows, casting a pulsing red across the clay-daubed walls, where the outlines of hanging tools and herbs create familiar silhouettes, comforting in their repetition. The smell of wood smoke is rich and earthy, mingled with damp wool, drying onions, and a faint lingering trace of animal musk. Each scent a layer of the day that clings to the room like memory woven into the very fabric of the home. The child by the hearth stirs slightly in his straw pallet, pulling the rough woolen blanket tighter around his chin with a half-conscious murmur. And somewhere above, in the loft, the slow shifting of a sleeping body causes the rafters to creak, a sound no one notices, for it is as natural as the sigh of wind or the beat of a heart. You begin to see now the deeper patterns that shape the lives of these people, how nothing is wasted, how every object, every action has purpose and meaning. The rushlights, those simple, hand-dipped candles made from fat and reeds, have been snuffed, leaving the hearth as the sole source of light, its glow slow and mesmerizing, inviting eyelids to droop and thoughts to wander. And in this deep quiet, the very air seems thicker, as though time itself is slowed to a near halt, content to drift with the smoke that curls lazily toward the thatched roof. You notice the way shadows move gently along the beams overhead, how even the silence is textured, filled with the soft sound of breathing, the gentle flutter of a hen adjusting her perch, the slow groan of winter wind against the eaves. The father, who still sits near the hearth, holds in his lap a simple garment, perhaps a woolen stocking with a hole worn through at the heel, and with careful fingers, he begins to mend it with a bone needle and coarse thread, each stitch slow and deliberate, not hurried but practiced, efficient in the quiet way of someone who has done this many times before. He does not need bright light. The fire's glow is enough, and his fingers know their task, even in shadow. Near him, the mother has begun to nod off in her seat, her head lowering gently, not in exhaustion exactly, but in surrender to the slowness of the hour, her hands resting still in her lap where the yarn she was spinning has pooled softly, like a fallen skein of snow. The dog by the fire lets out a quiet huff in its sleep, paws twitching slightly as it dreams of what we cannot know, but it is a comfort to see such life at rest. Outside, the world is hushed under a blanket of frost. The trees, tall and leafless, creak softly as the wind moves among them, and the snow, where it has fallen, absorbs sound so completely that even the hoot of an owl feels distant, muffled by the sheer weight of cold. In the stables, animals huddle close, cows press side by side, horses shifting their weight to keep their limbs from freezing, pigs nestled in straw so thick that their pink snouts are barely visible. The barns are drafty, but provide enough protection to keep death at bay, and the farmers know to check on them at dawn, to replenish hay and break ice from the water troughs. But for now, all is still. The village is wrapped in silence, and you, sitting here in this warm, dark room, begin to feel yourself joining the rhythm of this place. Your breathing slows, your thoughts soften. You can imagine the feel of the homespun tunic against your skin, rough but comforting, heavy enough to hold in your body heat. You can feel the warmth of the hearth, subtle but persistent, and the way the firelight flickers across the floor in shifting patterns, like reflections on water. You hear the house groan softly in its bones, and it feels almost alive, an old friend, worn but strong, watching over its inhabitants through yet another long, freezing night. And though the room is poor by modern standards, you cannot help but feel its richness. The hand-carved bowls, each one slightly different from the next. The wooden spoons darkened by years of use. The iron pot suspended above the coals, blackened with soot but still sturdy. The wooden cradle tucked near the mother's seat, its curved frame smooth from the touch of generations. Everything here tells a story. Everything is passed through hands made rough by work and softened by love. Even the patched tunics and threadbare shawls carry the echoes of voices, laughter, prayers, and tears. You realize now that this is not merely survival. It is a kind of quiet triumph. The triumph of knowing how to live with the land and not in defiance of it. The triumph of adapting to hardship not with bitterness, but with ritual, with candles lit, stories told, songs sung, herbs hung, and meals shared. It is a life with very little, but not a life without meaning. The children, curled now in their respective nests of straw and wool, do not stir. Their sleep is deep, natural, unmarred by screens or sirens, guided by firelight and fatigue. They dream perhaps of summer, of running barefoot through tall grass, of bees buzzing lazily above meadows, of bread fresh from the oven, and the simple joy of a berry picked from the hedgerow. Or perhaps they dream of nothing, their minds at last as quiet as the world outside. And you, too, begin to feel your body growing heavier, not with burden, but with rest. Your limbs soften, your eyelids flutter, your breath moves in slow waves. You're safe here. There is nothing more to do. No clocks to chase. No notifications to answer. Only the hush of winter, the heartbeat of the hearth, the gentle breath of sleep beginning to form in the corners of the room. You look once more around the cottage, and you see it differently now. You see not the poverty, but the grace. Not the lack, but the care. You see a family bound not just by blood, but by shared struggle, shared warmth, shared time. You see a community built of small acts, a bowl mended, a coat patched, a loaf divided. And it reminds you of something important, something quiet, something nearly lost in the noise of your own century. You understand, finally, that rest is not a luxury here. It is an act of preservation, of respect, of wisdom, to sleep through the night in a world that demands so much of you. That is a kind of victory. And so you close your eyes. You feel the warmth of the fire lingering on your skin. You hear the last sigh of wind against the shutter. You let go, because tonight you are one of them. A sleeper in the medieval dark, wrapped in wool and silence and the deep, enduring strength of those who came before you. As the deep winter night stretches further into its frozen silence, the cottage breathes slowly with the rhythm of its occupants, its walls thick with quiet history, its air layered with the soft remnants of daily labor, and the very bones of the structure seeming to hum with the slow music of survival. Everything inside is shaped by hands that knew intimately the turning of the seasons, the mood of the soil, the sound of distant bells echoing through bare trees, and above all else, the sacredness of warmth and stillness when the sun had long since vanished behind leaden clouds. And so now, in the embrace of that stillness, let us look more closely at the simple, powerful customs that helped these villagers endure not just a single night, but months of darkness and bitter air, and how every detail of their evening was molded with gentle intention and quiet repetition. By now, you may hear it, the scrape of the father's blade along a wooden spindle, shaping it into a crude peg, not for sale, not for show, but to repair the latch on the goat pen that had loosened with the frost, or perhaps the faint whisper of the mother's fingers plucking stray hairs from a strip of sheepskin that she will later cut and stitch into the lining of her youngest child's cloak. These tasks, small and unseen, are woven into the marrow of wintertime, when long hours indoors are not idle, but filled with slow, purposeful gestures that tether life to the familiar and the necessary. In the corners of the cottage lie baskets filled with half-finished chores, skeins of wool twisted into uneven balls, bundles of nettles drying for tea, scraps of linen set aside for patching, and each object rests quietly, waiting its turn to be touched, reshaped, used again. Even the cat, half buried in its nest of burlap beside the hearth, seems to understand the calm of such a space, its eyes half closed, its body twitching in soft dreams of springtime mice and warm stones. Outside, the world is untouched snow and skeletal trees, each branch coated in frost like sugar spun in silence. And yet within this cottage the senses are alive with texture and subtle movement. The soft murmur of breath, the crackle of firewood, the rhythmic scrape of cloth being folded and refolded as the mother prepares the family's sleeping bundles. There are no beds as you might know them, no high mattresses or fine linens, but rather layered pads of straw, sometimes mixed with dried bracken or rushes, laid carefully along the warmest sections of the floor, tucked away from doors and windows, lined with thick woolen blankets, rough to the touch but holding the warmth of many nights past. Some of these sleeping nests are slightly elevated on wooden planks or old crates, if the family is lucky enough to have spare timber. Others are simply laid upon the packed earth, which has been swept and covered with woven mats. Blankets, cloaks, even old capes retired from service are piled atop these nests in uneven mounds, and in the soft dimness you can see how the layers form small, warm hollows into which each person tucks themselves, sometimes alone, often together, for warmth is best shared when bodies are near. The father now rises, stretching slowly, his knees crackling in protest, and lifts one of the heavier sheepskin rolls, carefully unrolling it beside the hearth. The little one stirs, still asleep, and is lifted gently from the mat and placed into the roll like bread dough tucked in a proving basket. A sister leans from the loft above, her hair long and tangled from the day's work, and tosses down an extra wool wrap that is caught midair, shaken out, and draped over the child's feet. Even the act of settling into sleep is communal, a choreography of glances, gestures, and muffled words passed between parents, children, and elders, each person aware of the chill seeping in from outside and the need to hold the warmth close. And now, as they begin to lie down one by one, the cottage shifts into a deeper quiet, the kind of silence that folds in on itself like bread dough resting beneath cloth, dense and rich and slow. The fire is banked again, ashes drawn across the glowing coals with a flat iron paddle, and a few more pieces of hardwood are set aside nearby, ready to be added when the embers fade too low. These are the rituals that preserve life through the months when the fields lie dead and the sun is little more than a fleeting hope on the horizon. The candles are out now, and the only light is the low, red breath of the fire itself, casting long, gentle shadows that move and stretch across the walls with every pop and shift of the burning logs. You notice how the mother's face, lit from below, appears peaceful in sleep, how the father's hands, still calloused and red, rest open across his chest. One of the children, perhaps the middle one, whispers a line of prayer into the wool before sleep. Not for miracles, not for riches, but simply that the goats might not fall ill and that the food might last until the thaw. Outside, the snow has thickened, and if you press your mind to it, you can almost feel the weight of it pressing against the roof, insulating the home with its cold silence, making the whole world feel smaller and softer. Inside, the air grows cooler, but does not freeze. The warmth lingers like breath held in stillness. The chickens have gone quiet. The dog shifts one size, then settles. There is no more speech now, only dreams, slipping in one by one like guests at a midnight gathering. But this night, like all winter nights, is long, and sleep may not hold from dusk till dawn. Sometime after midnight, there will come a stirring. Someone will wake to tend the fire, perhaps the mother, her body trained by countless nights to rise without waking the others. She will add a log, stir the ash, adjust the cloth that covers the baby's head. Perhaps she will sit there for a while, not thinking much, just listening to the fire, to the wind, to the gentle creaks of the walls, to the sound of her own heart slowing again. And maybe, if she lingers long enough, the father will wake too, and they will sit together in silence or speak in low voices of what needs mending, what must be fetched from the root cellar, how much grain is left. This is not the disruption of sleep, but the soft interlude, part of an ancient rhythm the body has always known. First sleep, then awaking, then second sleep. And it is during this interlude that dreams are remembered, that prayers are whispered, that worries are set down gently in the dark. And so the fire rises once more, just enough to glow, and the night holds on, quiet and thick as wool, wrapping the family in its ancient hush, somewhere beyond the walls of the cottage, beyond the frost-rimed edges of the thatch and the narrow, muddied lane that curves like a quiet ribbon between the neighboring homes. The winter stars glimmer faintly behind thin ribbons of cloud, their cold light distant and ancient, indifferent to the slow breath of human life below, and though no one inside can see them now, their presence is still felt, as a kind of memory held deep in the earth, as a truth the villagers sense rather than observe, for they live not by clocks or calendars, but by patterns older than words, rhythms that beat beneath the soil and stretch through the limbs of the trees, whispering through frozen hedges and silent fields. And on this night, as the village sleeps, curled in its many low houses like a litter of cubs beneath their dens, the world beyond seems held in suspension, everything softened by the heavy hand of winter. Yet still life pulses beneath it, The distant barn, slumped at the edge of a snow-laced pasture, creaks with the slow movement of resting animals. Two cows breathing heavy in their stalls, a ewe shifting softly, the dull clink of metal from a loose harness swinging as the draft horse exhales, steam rising from its nostrils in clouds that quickly vanish into the gloom. The barn is dim, warmed by the animals themselves, insulated by straw piled thick along the walls, its timber posts blackened from years of smoke and weather, holding stories of many winters past. Inside, near a trough, a barn cat pads across a beam, its eyes catching what little moonlight there is, and pauses to listen, though even its feline ears detect no danger. Only the low, living hum of breath and bone and hay. The door is barred against wolves, against wind, against whatever waits beyond the lantern light. This is the outer circle of a household, the outer warmth, where survival still hums beneath layers of frost and instinct. Meanwhile, within the main cottage, the father has stirred, not fully awake, not sharply, but with the gradual heaviness of someone whose sleep, like the fire, is never allowed to burn unchecked for too long. He blinks in the orange glow, his face a silhouette against the dim hearthlight, and gently lifts himself from his nest of cloth and straw. His joints crack quietly, but he does not wince. His feet slide into worn leather shoes, softened by years, and he moves slowly toward the hearth, where the fire has dimmed into a bed of ashen coals with only the faintest orange heartbeat beneath. With practiced hands, he stirs the ash aside with a short stick carved long ago from hazel wood, exposing the glowing heart. A breath, a pause, a careful addition of thin slivers of kindling, shaved earlier and left nearby in a dry cloth, and the faint whisper of flame returns, rising with a shiver, then building in slow confidence. He adds a small log, perhaps from a stack of beechwood he split months ago during the golden days of autumn, when the leaves were turning and the air had not yet tasted of frost. The fire accepts it, and the room slowly brightens, shadows coming to life again on the uneven walls, dancing across the floorboards like memories summoned from sleep. The father does not speak. He does not need to. His movements are enough. He checks the kettle, emptied earlier, and refills it with water drawn from a clay jug. The water is cold, pulled from the well at dusk before the ice thickened. As it warms over the rekindled fire, the faintest tendrils of steam curl into the air. The warmth begins to spread once more, low and steady, and he sits for a moment with his hands open near the flame, fingers rough and lined, nails dark from soil and work. His gaze flicks toward the loft above, but the children sleep soundly, limbs tangled beneath their coverings, breath slow and even. The dog lifts its head briefly, then returns to rest, its flank rising and falling with the same cadence as the house itself. The father thinks, perhaps of the tools he must mend tomorrow, or the thatch that needs patching when the snow begins to melt, or the small handful of grain left in the store bin, and how it must stretch through Candlemas. These thoughts are not heavy. They are normal, familiar, constant companions during the long nights. He sips the warmed water, letting it fill the chill space behind his teeth, and for a long while, he simply sits there, breathing with the fire. Across the village, similar moments unfold in other cottages, like scattered stars in the night. A mother turning in her sleep and pulling her child closer, an elder stirring to massage the ache in their knees, a boy dreaming of summer fields and waking only slightly before drifting again into warmth. This is not insomnia. This is the space between, the sacred interval. Not everyone in the modern world remembers this, that before gaslights and alarms and digital clocks, the night was rarely a single stretch of rest. It was in two parts, with a tender pause in the middle. The fire-tending hour, the whispering hour, the thinking hour, and so, While the village sleeps, it also watches itself, breathes through the night with one eye half open, keeping the coals alive, the animals safe, the dreams tethered gently to the world. Back inside the cottage, the father finishes his drink, sets the cup aside, and wraps his cloak tighter around his shoulders. He steps softly to a small wooden chest, its lid creaking faintly as he lifts it. Inside are spare cloths, bits of twine, an old psalter wrapped in linen, and a pouch of dried rose hips for winter tea. He takes none of it, only checks it and closes the lid again, reassured that it waits should it be needed. The mother stirs now, sensing his movement more than hearing it, and her eyes flutter open, soft with sleep. He meets her gaze, and they share the kind of wordless understanding only long years can bring. She does not rise. Her hand moves slightly in acknowledgement, and then she sinks back into sleep. The father returns to his pallet, lies down again, and covers himself in the sheepskin without a sound. The fire crackles once, brighter for a moment, then softens. The coals are alive once more. The house returns to stillness. Outside, the cold presses against the walls, but it cannot enter. The snow drapes every rooftop in gentle silence, each flake its own brief poem, and the trees bend slightly under the weight of sky. The village lies in its winter breath, still and whole, hearts beating in unison beneath layers of wool and time. With the coals quietly alive in their bed of ash and the breath of the house steady and long, the hours drift slowly onward, not in a rush, not with purpose, but with the quiet dignity of wintertime itself, a season that teaches patience and slowness not through words, but through the way snow falls, through the way water freezes, through the way a branch breaks only after long pressure from the cold. And so the night thickens and deepens like porridge left to simmer. And though the world outside grows darker still, inside the simple home, life continues at its gentlest pace, shaped by 1,000 small rituals passed down from those long gone. In the loft, the eldest daughter, not yet fully asleep, lies awake under layers of rough wool and linen, her eyes adjusting to the dim flicker of the hearth light far below, her ears tuned to the creaks and breathings of the house, as if they were a lullaby older than memory. Her arms are tucked beneath her head, elbows poking up like the wings of a resting bird, and her breath fogs faintly in the cold air, which slips through the eaves and drapes across her brow. She does not shiver. She knows this cold, just as her mother and grandmother did before her, and her body has long since adapted to the rhythm of nights that begin cold, warm at the center, and return to cold again just before dawn. She listens as the wind outside picks up slightly, brushing against the corners of the thatched roof like a hand testing the weight of a coverlet. Below her, the sleeping forms of her family stir only occasionally, a hand brushing against a cloak, a sigh released into the room's stillness, a child murmuring something that vanishes into the weave of the night. And as she lies there, her mind drifts to the duties of tomorrow. Not chores, not work, for those words do not carry the same meaning here as they do now, but simply what must be done to maintain the quiet continuity of life in the depth of winter. She will rise early, fetch water from the well if the bucket's rope hasn't frozen, check the chickens for eggs, sweep the rushes clean of any ash carried in on the hem of her father's cloak. There is no resentment in her thoughts, only the slow ticking of a life lived close to necessity. Beneath her pallet lies a carefully folded shift, mended twice at the hem, save for Sundays or holy days. She touched it earlier while preparing for bed, fingers running across the stitching done by her mother's hand. It is not soft, nothing in her life is, but it is familiar, and in that there is comfort. Her legs stretch beneath the covers, and she shifts, drawing the sheepskin tighter. Sleep does not resist her. It simply comes slowly, like fog over a frozen field. In another part of the room, near the hearth, the baby begins to fuss softly in its sleep. A small mule, half waking. The mother, already half dreaming, hears it and responds with the instinct that predates language, lifting the child from its bundle, bringing it to her breast, tucking them both beneath the heavy wool. She does not need light to do this. Her hands, her arms, her very heartbeat knows the rhythm of care. The baby suckles quietly, the wet, rhythmic sound absorbed into the thick air. The mother hums something low, something formless, just a vibration in her chest, meant less to soothe the child and more to center herself in the timelessness of the hour. The father does not wake. The fire is still glowing. All is still well. The goat in the side sheds stamps once, breathes hard, settles again. If one were to walk silently through the village at this hour, wrapped tight in furs, stepping only on the hardened crust of snow, one might see faint curls of smoke drifting from a few chimneys. One might hear the snort of a horse from within the barn. One might see the glimmer of red light behind a shutter cracked open just slightly to leaden the air. The village is asleep, yes, but it is not unaware. Its stillness is a living stillness, not the absence of motion, but a pause within it. There are no lamps on poles, no car horns in the distance, no hum of electricity. Only the low whisper of wind through bare branches, the occasional bark of a dog stirred by something unseen, and the constant, slow pulse of breath from those within the walls. Inside the cottage again, a pot has been pushed closer to the coals to catch what warmth remains, filled with soaked oats that will soften through the night. Tomorrow, they will be stirred into a porridge, salted and possibly thinned with a ladle of goat's milk or water if milk is scarce. Each spoonful will be heavy, warm, sustaining. No sugar, no butter. Those are luxuries, but the heat itself will be the nourishment. On a small shelf above the hearth, there sits a beeswax candle, stubby and lopsided, its wick blackened from previous use. It is not burned tonight, not unless needed. Wax is precious, made in the summer when the bees were kind and the sun plentiful. Next to it, a sprig of dried rosemary, its scent faint but persistent, tucked into a crack in the wood, a charm of sorts, a remnant of the old beliefs, before saints and churches took hold of every corner. The people here are Christian, yes, but their roots are deeper than any single faith, and the old ways live still in the herbs hung above doorways, in the whispered charms for good weather, in the way a mother draws a circle in the air over her child's head as they sleep. These are the quiet magics of survival. These are the spells cast by hands, not wands. And perhaps that is the deepest truth of this night, that everything done within these walls is a kind of enchantment, not a fairy tale or myth, but of need made sacred. A bowl of oats soaking, a baby nursed in silence, a fire stirred back to life, a stitch pulled through cloth. Each act, so small alone, becomes together a great litany of care, a ritual that turns the harshest season into something survivable. The daughter at last succumbs to sleep, her breath slow and even, arms curled beneath her chest. The mother dozes now as well, the baby nestled quietly beside her. The father stirs once, exhales, and draws his cloak higher. The fire crackles one last time, then settles. The village holds still again. All things living rest beneath the stars, and the night wraps them tighter than any blanket ever could. As the night wears on, deeper now into its final watch, the hours where the frost is thickest and the air feels stiller than silence itself. The old timbers of the house seem to take on a solemn weight, bearing not just snow and cold, but centuries of breath, of whispered prayers, of footsteps from children long grown or gone. And the room, though unchanged to the eye, feels like it is holding time in its hands, cradling it the way a mother holds her newborn, gently and without rush. And in this hour, when the world outside is little more than ice-draped hedgerows and empty paths silvered with moonlight, the very stillness of the cottage becomes a living thing, breathing through its walls, humming low through its clay floor, and resting, always resting, within the folds of every woven blanket, every wooden spoon, every shard of light cast upward from the fire's coals. Within this stillness, beneath the half-collapsed roof beam where no one walks but spiders and the occasional shifting shadow of light, lies the rhythm of survival, not as a tale of battle or conquest, but as something far slower and gentler, a daily endurance shaped by care and repetition, by quiet work and older ways. Here, in these pre-dawn hours, the cold is not fierce but absolute, like a presence that presses in, gentle but unyielding, finding its way through every seam in the wall, every knot in the wood, every pore in the stone. Even the dog by the hearth is curled tighter, nose tucked beneath its tail, its breathing shallow and rhythmic, as though even in sleep it is guarding its warmth like treasure. The straw mattress shifts slightly under the weight of a body turning. One of the children, maybe the middle one, sensing the chill and sleep and pulling the blanket closer, the coarse wool rasping softly against skin. Their dreams, though unseen, hang like breath in the air. Dreams of sun-warmed fields and the smell of baking bread, of laughter spilling out into spring air, of chickens running wild and feet without shoes. And you begin to feel that even the dreams here are simpler, drawn from what is real and reachable, not stories of far-off riches or dragons, but the scent of wet earth, the laughter of siblings, the heat of a summer sun that seems impossibly distant now. Beneath the floor, in the root cellar carved carefully into the frozen ground before the first snow fell, there lie the remnants of the year's harvest. Onions bundled together in brittle braids, turnips dusted with dirt, apples softened with time, and a clay pot filled with lard sealed over with wax to keep out the air. A few sacks of barley, heavy and quiet, rest beside a small barrel of salted fish, the brine thick and still beneath its wooden lid. These supplies are measured not in volume, but in nights remaining. Each ladle of flour, each pinch of salt, is used with reverence, with a sense of math passed not through parchment, but through gut instinct and generational memory. The mother knows, without needing to count, how long the sack will last, how much can be spared for a celebration, how thin the broth must run by February's end. These are the unwritten calculations that shape the days and nights. How many logs remain, how many dried beans, how long the butter will hold. Above ground, resting in the quiet dark of the house, these calculations are not spoken aloud. They are carried, day to day, like water in a jar, always full enough to continue, never quite overflowing. The fire flares again, only slightly, enough to cast a longer shadow across the wall where drying herbs hang from wooden pegs. There is yarrow, thyme, and mugwort, each tied in bunches with coarse string, now brittle but still pungent, their uses known by touch and scent. Mugwort for dreams, thyme for the chest, yarrow for cuts that bleed longer than they should. They are not named aloud, only reached for when needed, drawn from their place like old friends, their powers passed on not with ceremony, but with quiet nods and well-worn gestures. The cottage is not a place of luxury, nor of despair. It is a place of rhythm, of seasonal wisdom, of deep and constant presence. On the table beside the hearth, a carved bowl rests in waiting, its edges smooth from years of holding porridge, broth, bread soaked in milk or wine. It is not just a bowl. It is the shape of nourishment, of daily comfort, of countless meals eaten with the same spoon, under the same roof, beside the same fire. The spoon, too, is old, its bowl worn shallow, its handle darkened where fingers have gripped it again and again. And nearby, a cloth folded carefully, woven with faint blue thread, perhaps once part of a wedding gift, perhaps handed down from mother to daughter, now used to keep the bread warm when it is set beside the hearthstone. These objects are not disposable. They are companions. In the loft, the daughter stirs again, not from cold, but from the echo of a dream just ended. She sits up, blanket drawn around her, and peers down into the room, seeing the soft glow of coals and the unmoving shapes of her family. She does not speak, but simply watches, eyes adjusting to the red-gold flicker of firelight playing across the packed earth floor. She thinks of her linen shift, her thick outer dress, her boots drying near the door. She thinks of her mother's voice in the morning, calling softly for her to rise, for the chickens to be checked, for the ashes to be carried out. She lies down again, one arm beneath her head, and stares at the rafters. A tiny draft slips through a knothole in the roof above, cool against her cheek, but not unpleasant. Her breath rises once more, then slows. Beneath her, her father coughs once in his sleep, deep and untroubled. Outside, the wind carries with it the faint creak of a tree branch, the call of a distant owl, the shift of snow on a sloped roof. The village beyond this house is a scatter of similar homes, each its own world, each with its own fire burning low, its own dreams unfolding under layers of wool and shadow. The church bell, frozen and silent, waits for morning. The path through the village is unmarked by footsteps. No one stirs. All wait, and the stars, though hidden by thick banks of cloud, are there above it all, cold and quiet, old as breath. And so the night holds, heavier now, thicker than before, as though the weight of centuries has gathered in the corners of the room and pressed the house deeper into its place upon the earth. The fire whispers, the house breathes, and the sleepers within, wrapped in the hush of another hard-earned rest, do not know what hour it is, nor do they care, for here, time does not command. It only accompanies. Morning, in its earliest shape, does not burst into this world but seeps, slowly and quietly, like warmth through a woolen sleeve, and in this pre-dawn hour, where time feels stretched and muffled by the lingering hush of night, the first signs of waking are not abrupt, but hidden, subtle. A creak in the floorboards as someone shifts beneath the weight of covers. A sigh from a child who rolls over in their sleep and pulls the blanket to their chin. The faintest change in the light near the small, frost-lined window, where the dark is not gone but has grown softer, thinner, as if tired of its long vigil. And this is the hour, too, when the cold is at its peak. Not the bracing chill of evening or the creeping frost of midnight, but the full settled cold that has laid claim to every surface, every breath of air, every inch of wall and rafter and roof. The stones near the hearth remain warm, of course, but beyond that comforting glow, the chill sinks deep into the floor, seeps into the wood, wraps itself around the windows, and curls under the doorway like a cat that refuses to leave. And yet, this hour is not feared. It is expected, lived with, known. The villagers are creatures of rhythm, not resistance. And even in sleep, their bodies anticipate the return of morning, the soft unraveling of dark into light. The mother is often the first to rise, not because she must, but because she always has, as did her mother and hers before that. And her waking is not sudden or harsh, but quiet and slow, like a lantern being lit beneath heavy cloth. She opens her eyes, adjusts to the faint glimmer of coals that still burn low in the hearth, and sits up, careful not to wake the child beside her. Her joints protest in the way that joints always do after a night on straw and wood and wool, but she does not wince, only stretches gently, lifts the blanket, and places her feet in the worn shoes at her bedside, shoes she knows by touch rather than sight. The floor is cold beneath her soles, and she walks with care toward the hearth, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she kneels to stir the fire back to life. The embers respond, reluctantly at first, then with a soft rush of breath and light as the new wood is added. The flames rise in slow orange tongues, casting long shadows against the dark walls, and the cottage begins its slow return from sleep. She pours a bit of water from the clay jug into the iron pot, sets it to warm over the fire, and begins to unwrap the small bundle of oats soaked overnight, now soft and thick with promise. The scent is faint, earthy and warm, like the memory of a field after rain. And though it is plain, it carries with it the comfort of something known, something steady. The rest of the household begins to stir now, drawn not by noise, but by the returning presence of light and scent and warmth. The father wakes with a stretch, coughing once to clear the damp from his chest, and swings his legs over the side of the mat. The children, curled in their sleeping places, shift and mumble, and the eldest daughter sits up in the loft, rubbing sleep from her eyes, pulling her dress over her shift before descending carefully, barefoot, to the ground floor. There are no words spoken yet, not out of coldness, but because speech has not yet returned to the room. It waits patiently until the fire is fully awake, until hands are warm and eyes are fully open. The mother hands the father a cup of warm water, and they share it without need for thanks. The daughter sets to her tasks without prompting, sweeping the rushes from the floor with a bundle of dried heather tied with twine, gathering yesterday's ashes into a small clay bowl for scattering later in the garden. The boys fetch more firewood, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air outside, their boots crunching softly over snow as they hurry to and from the stack. The baby stirs last, blinking in the new light, cooing softly as it is lifted, changed, wrapped again, and held close to the warmth of the mother's chest. Slowly, the house fills with movement, not loud, but constant, like the turning of a wheel, and the quiet rituals of morning begin to unfold. A wooden bowl of porridge is passed from hand to hand, each person taking their portion, blowing on the steam, eating slowly, without hurry. There is little conversation, only the soft sound of spoons scraping against wood, the occasional murmur, a cough, a quiet laugh at something remembered. In the corner, the dog stretches and yawns, then pads over to the hearth, circling twice before settling again. The room smells of oats, smoke, wool, and sleep. Outside, the sky is still pale, not yet blue but no longer black, and the village begins its shared waking. Other cottages exhale smoke from their chimneys, and the sound of footsteps, muffled by snow, marks the path of someone heading to the well, or to the barn, or to check the traps set out near the hedgerows. The air outside is crisp and biting, enough to sting the cheeks, but inside the homes, the fires glow, and the day begins. The family finishes their meal and sets to the work of the day. The mending of clothes, the splitting of kindling, the checking of stores, the planning of what few ingredients might stretch into dinner. There is no waste, no rush, no abundance, but there is order, and with order, peace. The father takes down a wooden stool and begins to carve, not for beauty, but for need, a missing leg for a bench, a new handle for a tool. The daughter spins while beside the fire, fingers deft and sure, her mind quiet and focused. The boys braid cord from old fibers to bind sacks, or play with pebbles in the corner, inventing games that mimic the chores they watch. The mother begins a slow inventory in her head, counting not coins, but handfuls of salt, of flour, of dried herbs and stored apples, measuring not wealth, but time. The cottage, in its age and wear, holds all of this like an old book, creased, softened, and worn, but full of life. Every crack in the wall tells a story, every smoothed edge of what speaks of use, of touch, of care. The fire burns stronger now, its heat pushing back the cold at the edges of the room, and the air inside grows softer, more alive. Outside, the trees are brittle with frost, the sky stretched wide and pale, and the snow reflects the light like crushed glass. But within the walls, it is warm, and that warmth is more than temperature. It is the warmth of presence, of belonging, of survival not through strength or speed, but through stillness, patience, repetition, and love passed through hands rather than words. WY mid-morning. Though the sun barely lifts its pale face beyond the edge of the woods, its soft light stretches just far enough to bleed across the uneven snow-covered fields, catching the frost on fence posts and cart tracks and making them glint like dull silver, as if the landscape itself is quietly exhaling a sigh of light after so many hours wrapped in shadow. And though it brings no real warmth, none that melts the ice or coaxes buds from the branches, it carries with it the promise of motion, of quiet industry, and the peasants, their bodies long attuned to the subtle language of seasons, begin the day not with haste, but with the slow certainty of those who know that survival is not found in speed, but in rhythm. The father, now fed and warmed, sets out toward the animal shelter with a rope in hand, not freshly woven, but repaired, its frayed edge carefully retwisted, for even the smallest item in this world is rarely replaced. Everything is reused, repurposed, passed down, or patched. And as he steps through the door, the cold greets him like an old rival, biting at his cheeks and catching in his beard. The barn smells of straw and old wood and the damp warmth of animals. And as he checks their feed, feels their breath, and moves quietly among them, he doesn't speak, for there's no need. These creatures, his companions in hardship, understand the silence of winter. One of the cows watches him with wide, slow eyes as he spreads a small scattering of hay from the loft above, its tail flicking once, more from habit than irritation, while a chicken perched in the rafters blinks and adjusts its feet, waiting for the scattered handfuls of grain the daughter will soon bring in a woven bowl. Meanwhile, the children tend to their tasks with a mixture of play and seriousness, chasing the chickens briefly, giggling under their breath, then kneeling solemnly beside the water trough to break the thin sheen of ice, the way they've seen their parents do, using a flat stone to crack the surface without spilling the precious liquid within. Back inside the house, the mother is on her knees beside the hearth, not praying, but scrubbing gently at a wooden bowl, her fingers red from the cold water, a cloth looped through her belt, her movements slow and methodical. She hums quietly, not a song with words, but a pattern of sounds that fills the silence, carries the weight of the morning, and echoes faintly off the stone walls. Behind her, herbs from the overhead beams drop the occasional leaf, brittle with dryness, falling onto the table or floor like tiny paper notes from the past summer. Near the door, where boots have been left to dry, the smell of wet leather and mud mixes with the more pleasant scent of smoke and old porridge. The table is bare now except for a single wooden spoon, worn smooth and resting beside the salt jar, and a scrap of linen folded with care to cover a heel of bread saved from the night before. A dog, its coat thick and mottled, sleeps near the fire, one ear twitching now and again as its legs kick in dreams, perhaps of hunting, perhaps of running, or perhaps simply dreaming in rhythm with the family it watches over. As the morning stretches on, the father returns from the barn with a bundle of kindling over his shoulder, his boots heavy with snow that crunches underfoot, and with a practiced motion, he sets it by the hearth, then shakes the frost from his cloak, hanging it on a peg by the door. He does not speak, but the mother looks up and gives a faint nod, a silent exchange of presence, of partnership, and then returns to folding cloth. The children have begun stringing a cord from one beam to another, tying it with clumsy knots to dry what laundry can be spare the water. Mostly under things, patch stockings, and a single apron with a burnt edge from when it came too close to the fire last week. Above them, the loft creaks with the movement of the eldest daughter, who shifts baskets, smooths bedding, and takes quiet inventory of the remaining rushes, counted by touch how many bundles remain to be replaced in the floor when the thaw comes. No one speaks of spring, not yet. It is too far, too abstract, too dangerous to long for. But they prepare for it in the way their bodies always do, by mending, by conserving, by making space. Outside, the wind picks up again, rattling the shuttered windows with fingers of cold, and the sound of it curling through the trees beyond the fence line is hollow and slow, like breath caught in a long tunnel. In the distance, the church bell tolls, not for a sermon, but to mark the hour, its voice muffled by the snow, yet still strong enough to reach across fields and lanes, reminding every soul of their place in time. And in a house farther down the lane, someone splits wood, the crack of axe against log ringing sharp through the air, while behind that house, a woman beats a rug with a stick, driving the dust from its threads into the pale light of morning. All across the village, similar motions repeat, measured, modest, unhurried, as if each family were playing the same soft melody on different instruments. Inside the cottage once more, the fire is rebuilt with care, and the pot is set to boil water for the midday broth. No meat today, just lentils and a bit of dried leek, but enough to bring warmth to the belly, enough to keep fingers nimble and minds clear. The mother sprinkles in a pinch of salt, stored in a cloth-wrapped pot near the hearth, and stirs slowly with the same spoon used since autumn. The scent rises, earthy, plain, good, and mingles with the smell of wool drying on the line. The eldest daughter joins her at the table, cutting a small wedge of hard cheese with a bone-handled knife, setting it on a wooden plate and breaking the bread into smaller pieces, preparing the meal without being asked. They move in silence, in perfect understanding, the room filled with the subtle sound of knife on wood, of broth bubbling faintly, of fire crackling low. When the father enters again, he carries with him a small bundle of withy rods, thin, flexible branches to be woven into a fence patch once the weather permits. He sets them beside the door and looks around the room, nodding quietly at the order, the warmth, the small victories of the day so far. He sits, accepts a bowl, and eats with the others, and the sound of their spoons moving in slow unison is the loudest sound in the room. No one speaks of hardship, for hardship is as common as snow. It does not need naming. Instead, they eat, they watch the fire, they rest their hands on the table, and they listen to the world beyond the walls. The wind, the wood pigeons calling faintly in the distance, the creak of branches under frost. And as the day unfolds, slow as always, they prepare not for escape or relief, but for continuation, for the long, sacred art of making it through, as the pale afternoon stretches its limbs across the narrow windows and casts a faint golden hue over the worn wooden beams. The cottage settles into that quiet middle space between work and rest, between the warmth of the hearth and the bite of the cold that continues to press just beyond the door, a kind of hushed interlude in the larger song of the day, where time itself slows even further and every movement becomes more deliberate, more sacred. And in this hush, the rhythm of life continues, gentle, tireless, and deeply human. The father, having returned from tending to the fence posts, removes his outer cloak and shakes loose the fine dusting of snow that had gathered on the shoulders, the flakes tumbling to the floor like tiny fragments of cloud, melting soundlessly into the packed earth. He stretches his back, the weight of labor evident in the curve of his spine, and leans over to place another log onto the fire with the reverence one might offer in a chapel. For the fire is more than heat. It is life, it is presence, It is the living heart of this small home, pulsing steadily with warmth and orange light. The log catches slowly, exhaling thin ribbons of smoke before settling into a steady burn, and the air in the room deepens, thick with the comforting scent of seasoned wood and a hint of broth still clinging to the edge of the pot. The mother, seated now with a basket in her lap, threads her needle carefully, mending a tear along the hem of a tunic that has seen more winters than any of the children. Her fingers steady from repetition, her eyes narrowed, not with strain, but with the intense quiet of concentration. The daughter sits beside her, spinning wool with a drop spindle, her hands moving with a gentle elegance, guiding the fibers in a thread with the ease of someone who has watched it done since infancy. The boys, quieter now after their morning exertions, sit near the fire polishing a few wooden buttons and oiling a small leather strap that had begun to crack from the dry air, taking pride in these small tasks that stitch them into the fabric of the household survival. The baby naps peacefully in its cradle, which rests close enough to the fire to stay warm, but far enough to avoid the dry heat. The cradle itself a simple wooden structure lined with soft scraps of worn linen, each corner bearing the marks of a craftsman's care. The faint carvings along the edge, the gentle curvature where the head rests, the subtle arch of the rocker. Outside, the snow has begun to fall again, not heavily, but in a steady, whispering descent that softens the world in layers, blanketing the roofs, weighing down the bare branches, and smoothing over the ruts in the road until all things appear as if carved from quiet. The air beyond the windows is blue and white and pale gray, the colors of stillness, the colors of breath held in. Inside, however, life breathes warmly, slowly, and with a softness that seems to echo in the flickering firelight, bouncing shadows across the walls and the ceiling beams where a few sprigs of last summer's herbs still hang, their leaves curled inward like sleeping hands. The father, resting now in a low chair near the hearth, sharpens a small blade with a whetstone, his strokes even and patient, not hurrying the task, but allowing it to unfold at its own speed, the way snow falls or broth simmers. Occasionally, he glances toward the door, listening for any sign that a neighbor might approach with a question or a need, but the only sound is the soft whistle of wind under the eaves and the shifting creak of timber as the cold presses gently against the walls. The mother finishes her stitch and knots the thread, then lifts the tunic to the light to inspect her work, nodding faintly in satisfaction before folding it neatly and setting it aside. She reaches for another garment, this one a child's underdress with a tear near the neckline, and begins again. The daughter sighs softly and sets aside her spindle, rubbing her wrists before rising to place a small bundle of rushes near the hearth for the evening, her bare feet making soft prints in the fine layer of dust near the fire. The dog wakes briefly, lifts its head, then lowers it again with a groan, content in the warmth and the nearness of its family. The day outside continues to dim, the sky retreating behind another curtain of snow, and a gray-blue twilight begins to settle over the village like a blanket drawn up to the chin. In the distance, one can just make out the low shape of smoke rising from another chimney, curling upward before being swept sideways by the wind, a quiet signal that another fire still burns, that another family remains tucked in their own cocoon of warmth and light. As the evening deepens, the tasks inside the cottage become fewer, more ceremonial. The evening cloth is placed over the table, a simple square of linen frayed at the edges but still clean, still whole. The bowls are set out in a slow, mindful order, each one inspected for cracks or stray ash. A small hunk of dried meat is fetched from the pantry, sliced thin, and added to the pot, now bubbling again with barley and leeks. The scent is humble but filling, and it draws the boys from their corner, the daughter from her seat, the father from his resting place. They do not rush, nor do they clamor. They simply come with quiet anticipation, knowing that the meal will not be grand, but it will be shared. They sit, heads bowed for a breath of silence, and then they eat, slowly, savoring each bite, not out of indulgence, but out of presence, aware of every mouthful, every grain. The baby is fed last, a bit of broth cooled and spooned gently from a carved bowl, and the mother hums as she feeds, her voice a lullaby made of breath more than tone. When the meal is done, the bowls are wiped clean with rags, the spoons placed in a small basin with water to soak, and the fire is stirred again, just enough to burn through the next few hours. The light in the cottage is dim now, not from lack, but from intention, from the understanding that darkness is not an enemy, but a partner in rest, in quiet, in the closing of the day. The children begin to prepare for bed, layering their shifts, brushing dust from their hands, settling into the blankets and furs in the loft and the corners of the room. The daughter folds her woolen dress and tucks it near the fire to keep it dry, then climbs in her bedding with slow, practiced movements, her breath already deepening. The father checks the door one last time, securing the wooden latch, peering out into the white stillness for a moment before turning back toward the warmth. The mother rocks the cradle gently, murmuring something only the baby hears, something made of sound and love and memory. And slowly, one by one, the sounds of the cottage fade. The last pop of the log on the fire, the final murmur of cloth being folded, the closing exhale of a child slipping into sleep. The fire flickers low. The light softens further. And the cottage, full of life only moments ago, exhales with contentment and returns to its slumbering state, wrapped in wool and warmth and winter's quiet blessing. As the darkness outside deepens into the cold and absolute quiet of late evening, the kind of hush that feels as though it has weight and depth, like a thick velvet curtain drawn across the world, the warmth within the peasant cottage grows more sacred with every heartbeat, and the stillness inside, now nearly complete, hums with the invisible vibrations of lives slowed to their gentlest rhythm, all movement winding down as if guided by some ancient, unspoken knowledge that rest is not just necessary but holy, and the small flame of the hearth continues its flicker, barely needing tending now, offering a steady orange glow that softens the hard angles of the room and casts faint shadows along the beams above, shadows that sway with the occasional gust of wind that sneaks down the chimney or rattles the shuttered window panes with cold fingers. The air inside is warmer than outside, of course, but not warm in the way we might know today. It is layered warmth built slowly, protected with effort, shared between bodies, held in woven cloth and thick wool and stone that has absorbed the day's fire and now releases it gently like a deep exhale. Every object in the cottage bears witness to the rhythm of this life. The walls streaked faintly with soot from hundreds of fires, the beams darkened by smoke and time, the floor worn smooth from countless bare feet passing in and out, the simple table with its uneven legs and a faint scorch mark from a candle once knocked over in a gust of wind many winters ago, and even that mark has become part of the place's memory. A small scar carried without shame, much like the calluses on the father's hands or the weather-creased lines around the mother's eyes. In the loft, the children lie curled together under heavy layers of patch blankets, their limbs occasionally shifting, a foot slipping from under the covers and quickly tucked back again, a sleepy murmur shared between siblings before silence reclaims them, and their dreams, though unseen, feel near, tangible almost, filling the room like soft mist. The eldest daughter, always last to settle, takes one final look at the fire below before wrapping her shawl tighter and closing her eyes, her mind filled not with fear or excitement, but with memory and gentle repetition. The feel of yarn between her fingers, the smell of warm broth, the whisper of wind in the trees. Below, the mother smooths the baby's hair with the back of her hand, her movements slowed not by weariness alone, but by intention, by the understanding that this touch, this moment, will fade with time. And so she holds it just a few seconds longer before drawing the child into the crook of her arm and resting her chin against its downy head. The father, seated near the hearth, tends to the fire with one last piece of kindling, pressing it gently into the embers so that the glow remains steady through the first hours of sleep. And the crackle it gives off is so familiar that it no longer startles, but soothes, a sound like memory itself. There are no clocks here, no ticking, no screens or artificial lights. Only the slow, patient turning of the world outside, measured by moonlight slipping through the cracks in the roof, by the shifting winds, by the natural rest and rise of breath. Beyond the house, the snow continues to fall in fine, drifting veils, cloaking the village in a silence so deep it feels like the earth has drawn a long, deep breath and then paused in thought. The trees, skeletal in the cold, stand guard over the fields, their bare limbs bending beneath the slow accumulation of snow, and the fences, once clear, are now mounds of softness, the sharp edges of the world smoothed by the steady hand of winter. In the barn, the animals sleep too, their warmth shared and huddled together, their breath misting the cold air, their bodies still save for the occasional twitch or rustle of straw. The chickens, roosting high in their beams, rest with their feathers fluffed and heads tucked, and even the goat lies quietly now, no longer stamping or shifting, but resigned to the deep, fixed stillness that only winter nights can teach. And in other cottages scattered through the village, the same scenes unfold, different families, different hands, but the same essential truths, the same quiet rituals of survival, of care, of making enough out of little, of preparing not for abundance, but for endurance. Candles burn low or not at all, for wax is precious and darkness is not feared. It is welcomed, embraced, wrapped around the bones like a second skin, teaching all who live within it that one does not need to see in order to know. The air inside remains faintly scented with wood smoke, with wool and earth, with the residual fragrance of herbs that hang in bunches above the hearth. Lavender, sage, marjoram, most of their oils faded by now, but their memories still present, infused into every thread, every breath. Near the door, a pair of boots waits beside a drying cloth hung on a peg, and beside them, a small carved object sits on the floor, a toy left behind by one of the children, perhaps a little figure of a horse or a woman or a house, carved from a scrap of firewood, smoothed by fingers and imagination. Such things are not discarded in this life, not broken or lost. They are kept, mended, repurposed, infused with value through use. Even the broom in the corner, its bristles uneven and its handle worn smooth, is not just a tool, but a companion to hundreds of mornings, sweeping ashes and dust and dropped crumbs into the fire. The cottage itself seems to breathe, to rest, to settle into its foundation as the night deepens, as if it too needs the stillness, the pause between days, and the family within is a part of its body, its pulse, its purpose, its warmth. There is no noise save for the small, living sounds, the tick of a settling beam, the soft exhale of sleeping breath, the low hum of wind curling past the stone walls. And in this deep, slow hour, time bends, flattens, becomes something more circular than linear, a wheel, a breath, a lullaby without end. The family sleeps, not because they are exhausted, though they are, but because sleep is the shape the world takes when it is ready to rest, when it is given what it can and waits to be given to again. There is no thought of tomorrow in their dreams, no anxiety, No plans beyond the simple knowing that the fire must be stoked again, the animals checked, the water drawn. That life must go on not in leaps, but in footsteps, and each of those steps is enough. The cold outside may deepen, the snow may rise, but within these walls, there is warmth, there is breath, there is the sacred repetition of a life not defined by lack, but by care. Care in every stitch, every spoonful, every shared silence. The night continues, unbroken, unhurried, and the world sleeps with them, resting in the hush between heartbeats. As midnight slips silently over the threshold of the world, unnoticed by all but the moon and the restless wind, the small peasant cottage remains wrapped in its own cocoon of breath and ember glow, undisturbed by the hours passing. For time here is not measured in bells or ticking clocks, but by the quiet rituals of sleep and waking, warmth and cold, light and shadow, and in this deep stillness. When the snow outside has fully buried the paths, and the branches groan softly beneath their weight. When even the fox in the forest hesitates before breaking the crust of white that now covers the world. The walls of the house hold close the slow rhythm of life, beating gently like a heart beneath wool and wood. The fire, though low, is not out. Its coals glow deep red, steady and sure, like the core of a candle that refuses to die. And its warmth, though faint, still rises in slow spirals into the darkness, chasing away just enough of the night to keep the silence from becoming cold. The air in the cottage is heavy with the scent of burning ash, of warm wool, of drying boots, and of sleep itself, the kind of layered ancestral sleep that holds generations in its arms and asks no questions. The baby murmurs in its cradle, rolling over without waking, one tiny hand escaping its swaddling and curling near its cheek, fingers twitching as if holding dreams too small to see. The mother stirs, not from fear or duty, but from instinct born of years and seasons and nights just like this, and she shifts gently beneath her blanket, opening her eyes not to look, but to listen, to feel, to reach into the dark and confirm that everything remains in place. The warmth of her family, the breath of her children, the quiet of the roof above. Her hand rests briefly on the cradle's edge, steady and sure, then returns beneath the covers, and her eyes close again, not hurriedly, but with the soft exhale of someone returning to something rather than leaving it. In the loft above, the eldest daughter dreams of something that makes her smile faintly in her sleep, perhaps a summer memory or the imagined warmth of a day that has not yet come, and her body remains still, wrapped in a heavy blanket sewn with old patches, each one a story. A torn apron, a worn-out dress, the sleeve of a cousin's shirt. The boys shift together in their bedroll, tangled in their sleep but undisturbed, accustomed to shared warmth and the simple comfort of another heartbeat nearby. Outside, the wind sharpens, scraping across the roof like a broom of frozen bristles, rattling the corners of the wooden shutters and whistling faintly through the gaps where wood has shrunk and shifted with age. But these sounds are not alarming. They are expected, familiar, like the creaks of the floor or the groan of a door on its hinge, part of the house's voice, part of the language of the season. The animals in the barn feel it too. The cow shuffles its hooves softly in the straw, resettles itself with a deep, steaming breath, and the chickens, tucked into their roosts, ruffle their feathers just once before tucking their heads more tightly beneath their wings. The barn breathes as the house does, warm bodies in cold air, a pact made with winter, a promise to endure. Within the house, the tools of the day rest where they were left. The spindle lies beside the hearth with a length of half-spun thread still clinging to it. The wooden ladle remains near the pot, clean but not polished, its bowl stained by years of use. A sewing needle stands upright in a scrap of cloth on the table. waiting for the morning, and the water jug, still half full, catches the firelight faintly in its glaze. These objects are not merely things. They are threads in the fabric of life, each one holding purpose and memory in the quiet touch of countless hands. Even the walls seem to hold warmth, not just from the fire, but from laughter, from songs once sung, from the quiet murmur of stories passed down as the light faded on a winter afternoon. The hearthstone, soot-blackened and worn, bears the imprint of generations kneeling to stir soup, to warm hands, to whisper prayers no longer remembered word for word, but still present in the motion of stirring, of touching, of being near the flame. The father sleeps with one arm draped across his chest, his face turned toward the ceiling, his breath deep and slow. And though his dreams remain his own, his body tells the story of a man carved by earth and frost and duty, his hands marked by labor, his shoulders bowed by seasons, his soul quieted by the simple rightness of presence, of having done enough for today. The night continues, deeper now, the kind of deep that has no edges, only softness, and the stars, though hidden by clouds, still hang above, old and cold and steady, watching the world without judgment. Somewhere, far from this village, kings and courts may stir, horses may ride, torches may blaze, but none of that noise touches this place. Here, in this small, warm house half buried in snow, the world is no less rich, no less holy. Here, the sacred lies in the silence between breaths, in the comfort of shared blankets, in the sound of firewood crackling softly into ash. There are no riches, no silk curtains or golden goblets, but there is warmth, there is rest, there is enough. And as the hours stretch forward, inching slowly toward dawn, time becomes a blanket itself, thick and gentle and heavy in the best way. The house does not change. It simply continues. It exists, not in anticipation, but in presence, cradling its sleeping family like an old tree shelters birds in a storm. The fire dims again, its light soft and flickering, casting shadows that sway like lullabies. And the night, wrapped around the house like a story yet unfinished, hums its quiet song to the beams, to the stone, to the wool, to the hearts beating softly beneath blankets, and to the darkness that, even in its coldest hour, holds them not with malice, but with the quiet promise that morning will come. Not suddenly, not loudly, but gently, in its own slow way, just as it always has. And still, the night stretches on, deep and vast, and without urgency, as if the world itself has slowed its breathing to match the rhythm of the slumbering earth, and the cottage, nestled quietly within its snowy shell, remains cradled in that liminal space between yesterday and tomorrow, where dreams drift slowly like smoke curling through rafters, and time forgets to tick forward. Within these wooden walls, everything is softness and hush. The only sounds a quiet symphony of gentle breathing, the faint stirrings of sleepers, and the ever so slight whisper of snow shifting outside, falling and lazy, spirals upon the roof and gathering in small drifts at the corners of the window ledges. The air inside the home is no longer warm in the way it was earlier, but it is not cold either. It is a kind of held warmth, banked like the coals beneath the ash, steady and silent, a warmth that lingers because it has nowhere else to go. The fire, now low and glowing rather than burning, sends out soft pulses of heat, casting faint orange halos across the hearthstones and causing the iron pot, which has been emptied and wiped, to gleam dully in the half-light. No one tends it now. No one needs to. Its slow-burning core has become a living presence in the room, a heartbeat that steadies the dark. The mother sleeps with the baby nestled close. Both of them turned slightly toward the wall, their silhouettes gentle and unmoving beneath the woolen blanket stitched long ago by a grandmother's hands. Each patch a different weave, a different shade of earth or ash or bark, their very colors telling a story of winters past. Her hair, braided loosely before bed, spills over her shoulder and blends with the folds of the bedding. And her breath, deep and slow, matches that of the child pressed against her chest, the soft rise and fall of their bodies creating a slow rhythm in the stillness. In the loft, the children have fully surrendered to sleep, no longer murmuring or stirring, their limbs wrapped around one another like roots tangled beneath the soil, the shared heat of siblinghood forming a small fortress against the cold that presses against the slats of the roof. One of the boys clutches a carved wooden animal, worn at the edges from so many nights of holding, and even in sleep his fingers remain curled around it, as though to let go would be to invite the cold in. The eldest daughter, ever the watchful one, lies curled on her side with her hand tucked under her cheek, a faint crease between her brows not from worry but from habit, a gesture that lingers long after the day's thoughts have faded. She does not dream of palaces or riches or great adventures, but of light, sunlight on fields, the feel of warm bread in her hand, the echo of laughter from summers that seem far away in the thick of winter's hush. And in the low chair by the fire, the father sleeps with his back against the wall and his arms crossed over his chest, his boots removed and set neatly beside him, his head tipped forward in that half collapse that only comes from exhaustion earned through honest work. His face, furrowed and lined, appears softer in sleep, the creases gentler, the jaw slack, the years of toil melting into the quiet peace of rest. He does not wake, even when the wind outside picks up again and whistles beneath the eaves, because this house has held him for too long to let him worry. The shutters rattle briefly, but the latches hold. The door groans softly in its frame, but the hinges remain strong. Snow brushes against the thatch and slips off in a soft hiss, but the roof does not leak. And beneath this small structure, rough, worn, and unremarkable to those who measure worth by stone and silver, there's a sense of deep safety, of ancient quiet, as if the house itself has memories of every winter it has endured and whispers those stories to the night to keep the cold at bay. On the table, a wooden bowl still carries the faint smell of barley from the evening meal, and beside it lies a folded cloth used to wipe small mouths clean, now stiff with use and dampness. A single candle stump, long since burned down, leans in its holder, melted wax pooled at the base and hardened into a pale crescent. There are no luxuries here, no ornaments or gilded edges, yet everything in this space has been touched by care, by function wrapped in affection, and in this, the home glows more brightly than any castle hall. Outside, the snow continues its slow, soundless descent, piling up along the sides of the house, covering the world in a thick, forgiving blanket, hiding imperfections, smoothing out the rough places, and making the paths of the day disappear under its soft insistence. The moon, full and round behind the curtain of clouds, casts only the faintest silvery glow, just enough to illuminate the outlines of fence posts and tree trunks and the thatched rooftops of nearby cottages, each one holding its own story, its own silence, its own circle of warmth in a landscape otherwise frozen. Far off in the woods, a lone owl calls once and then again, its voice echoing through the bare branches like a question left unanswered, and the wind carries that sound through the village, slipping into chimneys, brushing across barns, rustling the hay stacked high beneath wooden beams. But within the cottage, those sounds are far away, softened by wool and wood and the hush of deep sleep. The hours pass slowly here, unmeasured by clocks or lamps, marked instead by the soft shifting of a blanket, the crackling sigh of a cooling log, the quiet, almost imperceptible tick of frost forming on the inside of the shutter hinges. Time itself seems to settle like dust in this space, patient and unmoving, content to linger. And still, sleep holds them all, not a restless sleep, not one chased by hunger or fear, but a heavy, rooted sleep born of earned rest and the knowledge that the fire was tended, the door was latched, the animals were fed, and the family is together beneath one roof. This is what survival looks like, not grand or triumphant, but simple, sacred, slow. The father's breath deepens. The mother shifts in her sleep, murmuring something soft and unintelligible. The baby sighs and stretches and nestles in again. The fire flickers once, then settles into a low glow. And still, the snow falls, layer upon layer, silent and soft, until it feels as though the whole world has been blanketed in breath, in warmth, in the ancient promise that no matter how long the night may seem, morning will come, slowly and without fanfare, breaking gently over the edges of the earth and into the stillness of another waiting day. And so the long night continues its slow passage, not marked by chimes or clocks, but by the quiet expansion of silence itself, as if time were, unfolding gently across the rooftops and drifting through the frozen air in long, invisible ribbons, touching everything with the same calm intent. And in the peasant cottage, sheltered under a thick quilt of thatch and snow, the stillness has deepened into something sacred, something tender and wide, as though the house has inhaled and chosen not to exhale, just yet, choosing instead to hold this moment of rest a little longer, to cradle its sleeping family in the hush between worlds within. The walls, there is no movement now, only the gentle breathing of those tucked under blankets. The soft rise and fall of bodies long used to sleeping close, the air gently warmed by the low-burning coals in the hearth, whose light flickers just enough to create a faint, dancing glow on the nearby stone, the kind of light that doesn't disturb, but comforts, a flickering heartbeat within the darkness. The fire is a patient thing now, its strength banked in thick ash, its work done for the day, its only task to keep the cold from creeping too far into the bones of the house. And in this moment, it performs that task with quiet grace, its warmth no longer fierce but familiar, subtle, steady. The mother has turned in her sleep, now lying on her back with one hand resting gently on the baby's chest, the child sleeping so deeply that not even the occasional creak of the roof beam stirs it. And nearby, the father, who has slipped into the bedroll beside them sometime after midnight, now breathes in slow unison, the faint trace of soot still lingering in his beard. The smell of the outside world mingling with the scent of wool and wood smoke and the faint, earthy aroma of herbs that still hang above the hearth. Remnants of summer, dried and delicate, tied with string and left to whisper their fragrance into the room during these long, scentless months. Above them, in the loft, the children remain deep in their own quiet realms, curled like young animals in their bedding, their arms flung in unconscious trust over each other's shoulders, their dreams stretching long across fields of memory and imagined spring. Though they do not know it, their minds may carry the scent of green things, the feel of dirt under fingernails, the weight of summer sun on bare skin, and though the snow presses tight around the house, they sleep as if beneath apple blossoms, as if the cold were only a story told by the wind. The wooden ladder leading up to the loft remains untouched, its rungs smoothed by years of small feet climbing it in both light and darkness. And nearby, the long bench along the wall, used for sitting and mending, for carving and peeling and whispering songs, now sits in quiet shadow, its surface scattered with tiny wood shavings from a toy that was carved earlier in the week, the kind of project done not for necessity, but for affection, to bring laughter or comfort to a child with cold. Fingers and a winter-long imagination. Every object in the house, though simple, holds meaning, not as decoration, but as memory, as testimony. The wooden comb on the shelf that once belonged to the mother's own mother. The clay jar by the door that still holds the last of the salted pork from autumn slaughter. The heavy woolen shawl folded on the stool, smelling faintly of fire and weather and time. These are not things kept for beauty. They are tools of life, worn smooth by touch, by repetition, by need. Outside, the snow continues to fall, layer upon soft layer. The flakes growing finer and smaller as the temperature dips even lower, and the world outside begins to sound as if it were wrapped in cloth. The usual creaks of trees and rustles of night creatures swallowed by the sheer density of silence. In the barn, the animals barely move, gathered in huddled groups, their warmth shared instinctively, their bodies steaming faintly in the cold, dark air, the scent of hay and manure and animal breath mixing in a quiet testament to endurance. And in the fields beyond, everything has gone still. No distant footfall, no wheel, no song or voice or movement of any kind. Just the white blanket of winter stretching endlessly under a starless sky. The forest, once alive with sound even in the cold months, stands like a great black silhouette against the deeper black of the sky. Every branch brittle with frost, every hollow tucked with snow, and the path that once led through it, trodden by cart and boot and beast, is now invisible, buried, lost beneath a smooth surface unmarred by footprints. And yet within the cottage, time does not worry about what is buried or what has vanished. It continues slowly, steadily, gently, asking nothing of its inhabitants but to remain still, to rest, to allow themselves the rare luxury of uninterrupted sleep, of breath unbroken by labor or fear. Even the beams of the house seem to lean a little lower now, as though relaxing into the warmth, as though sighing with the night. A single mouse rustles faintly near the base of the wall, nibbling at a forgotten crumb. But even its movements are cautious, hesitant, respectful of the silence that drapes the room like a velvet curtain. Nothing hurries, nothing stirs, and yet everything lives. The fire breathes, the blankets shift, the snow falls, breath rises and falls in human chests. Life continues in the quiet, in the dark, in the deep-rooted stillness that requires no voice, no ceremony. This is the heart of winter, not a place of hardship, but of waiting, of gathering strength, of drawing close. And as the night wears on, pressing gently toward the fragile, unseen edge of morning, the cottage remains unchanged in its essence. A shelter, a vessel of warmth and breath and memory, a place where sleep is allowed to bloom fully, undisturbed, and where time folds in on itself like a hand closing around a precious thing. The old beams, the stones, the woven cloth and the carved bowls, the sleeping bodies and the half-burned logs, all hold one another in quiet covenant. Not to race, not to strive, but to endure, to be, to belong to the long hush of winter, and to rise again with the light when it comes. And when at last the night begins to peel gently away from the edges of the world, so slowly that it is not noticed at first, like a softening at the corners of a tightly drawn curtain or the faintest paleness creeping along the low horizon. It is not with brilliance or fanfare, but with hush, with reverence, as though the morning itself is aware that it enters sacred space, and the cottage remains still, cradled in that tender, in-between hour when both the darkness and the light belong to. Neither realm entirely. Inside, the air is cooled even further, but the blankets are thick, the bodies beneath them warm, and there is no rush to rise, for the sun has not yet lifted her head above the treetops, and the day has made no demands. The fire, now nothing more than a bed of slumbering embers, glows a low, steady red in the hearth, a soft core of warmth that has kept its promise through the long, cold hours. The father shifts first, though not yet to rise. He rolls his shoulders, stretches a leg beneath the furs, and lets out a low sigh, the kind that belongs to a man who has slept deeply enough to know rest, and who has not yet remembered the weight of the day ahead. The mother stirs as well, blinking once, adjusting the child in the crook of her arm, then laying still again, content to remain for just a while longer in that cradle of warmth and woolen breath. The baby, undisturbed, sucks softly in its sleep, a contented sound that fills the silence with life. Above, the loft remains quiet, though one of the boys has pulled the blanket over his head entirely, his toes poking out from beneath the edge, exposed to the cool air but too deep in sleep to care. The eldest daughter, as always, is the first to rise truly, her eyes fluttering open as though guided by the same silent pull that stirs the birds from their roosts, and she moves slowly, reverently, pulling her shawl around her shoulders, letting her bare feet find the cold floor with a wince, but not a complaint. She tiptoes down the ladder, her movements careful and practiced, and kneels by the hearth, her breath misting in the faint chill as she gently pokes at the ashes, coaxing out the coals and feeding them the tiniest sliver of dry kindling, the same way she's seen her mother do since she could first remember. The flame responds slowly, like a sleeper reluctant to rise, catching at last and blooming in a soft curl of orange light. The cottage glows again, and though the sun still waits behind the trees, the house is waking. She adds another piece of wood, then slips the kettle over the flame, the clink of iron on stone a small, sacred sound. The mother sits up slowly now, her hair unbound, her expression soft and far away, her hand instinctively smoothing the bedding beside her before swinging her legs over the edge of the sleeping space, her feet touching the earth floor like they do every morning, like her mother's feet did before her. The father rubs his face, yawns deeply, and murmurs a blessing beneath his breath, not because he is pious by ritual, but because that murmur is part of the waking, part of acknowledging the return of light, the return of duty, the return of life to the world. Outside, the snow still lies thick and undisturbed, but in the east, the sky has begun to shift, blues giving way to pale, winter yellow, a low hum of light behind the distant trees. A bird calls once, thin and bright, and so begins the slow reassembly of the day. The eldest daughter pours warm water into a basin near the hearth and begins wiping down the wooden table, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, her movements quiet but purposeful. The boys begin to stir overhead, groggy, mumbling, flopping first one way, then another, before at last emerging with hair tousled and cheeks flushed from sleep. They descend the ladder half-dressed, laughing softly, whispering about dreams or poking at one another's ribs, the hush of morning still lingering like a layer of snow. The mother combs her hair by the light of the fire, pulling the wooden comb through the long, tangled strands with care, then begins preparing the morning meal. A bit of porridge made from grains soaked overnight, stretched with milk and sweetened faintly with a bit of dried apple, set to simmer in the same pot used every morning, its blackened bottom telling stories of years' worth of mornings just like this one. The scent rises quickly, mixing with the fire's smoke and the faint smell of warm wool and clean wood, creating an aroma that belongs only to this moment, only to this space. The father steps out briefly into the sharp dawn air, boots crunching through fresh snow, the door swinging open to reveal the blue-white world beyond, his breath rising in puffs as he checks the barn, his figure hunched slightly against the chill, but familiar, dependable, a part of the landscape. He returns with a small bucket of milk and a smile. shaking snow from his shoulders before stepping back inside. The candle by the window has been relit, a small light to welcome the new day, and as they gather to eat, no one speaks loudly. The meal is eaten with hands around bowls, spoons scraping gently, steam curling up and brushing against faces still soft from sleep. There is no rush. The day will come in its time, and there is hay to turn, a garment to mend, wood to chop, boots to repair, but those tasks wait patiently outside the ring of warmth around the hearth. The baby wakes, blinking against the firelight, and coos, and even that small sound seems to bring brightness to the room. Someone laughs softly, someone stretches, someone sighs. And this, too, is survival. Not just the keeping out of the cold, but the finding of warmth, the keeping of one another, the gathering around something as small and simple as breakfast. The fire is burning stronger now, casting long shadows behind the benches and stools, and the light outside grows golden and pale, slipping through cracks in the shutters, painting the walls with its slow-moving glow. The village stirs as well, smoke rising from chimneys one by one, footsteps beginning to break the surface of the snow, and somewhere a rooster calls, a bell rings faintly in the chapel tower, and another day, in all its smallness and splendor, begins again. Within the cottage, they do not rise all at once, but drift into their tasks, as if carried by a gentle tide. One daughter folding bedding, the sons hauling in wood, the mother rocking the baby, while humming a tune her own mother once sang to her in another winter. And outside, the snow sparkles now beneath a clean morning sun, the weight of the night lifted, if only slightly, and the world, cold though it remains, feels somehow softer for having been held through the dark. Life, even in its simplest form, is enough. And here, among wood and wool and silence and fire, that truth breathes in every corner, in every footstep, in every bowl, every breath, every whispered blessing. The winter is far from over. The cold will come again tonight. But for now, the morning has arrived, and with it the gentle, ongoing rhythm of life, unbroken, undiminished, and utterly, beautifully quiet.